Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Roundup podcast. I am your usual co-host, David Fox. With me, as usual, is the wonderful, amazing, spectacular UberHansen. And we are here to talk about, cry, maybe, about the Bills' absolute dud of a game against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London. It was, first of all, an unfortunately timed game, literally, because it played at 9:30 in the morning, which I despise immensely, just in general, but especially since I work at 9 in the morning at a church in and I can't really watch much of these games. Not that, well, at least I shouldn't. I ended up doing it anyway, but yeah, it's very, very frustrating to have this game be played at that time. It's not like that's a whole other discussion. In any case, that was one annoying part before you get to the Bills pooping their pants on offense, and then of course you have the added injuries. You have over officiating. It was just a mess pretty much from start to finish. Plus a really crappy NFL Network broadcast where they just could not figure out what to do at any point during that game, what they needed to. It was very, very strange. Anyway, welcome all of you to the Cover One Roundup podcast. We're going to talk about this game. We're going to talk about the injuries that came out of this game. We'll address a little bit of news. We'll do all of that. But first, Uber, how are you this Monday evening?
I mean, yeah, you kind of summed it up perfectly. Like, that game stunk from the way it was covered to the product on the field to all of the injuries that are a result of it. So kind of a little bit bummed by that, but I woke up this morning, had a bowl of Frosted Flakes, and I've been feeling great all day since. So
there you go. Got that Tony the Tiger in you.
There I go. Yeah.
Right? That's Tony the Tiger of Frosted Flakes. Okay.
Yeah.
I enjoy cereal, but I was never a Frosted Flakes kid and that sort of stuff. Man, whatever. Anyway, so before we get into anything else, we gotta talk about our wonderful, lovely sponsors over at Underdog Fantasy. Folks, we're in the middle of the season, and we're also in the middle of fantasy football season. If you're like me, you're doing surprisingly well across most of your leagues, except for one where you're 0-5. But that's okay. You don't need to worry about that because you're doing so well. In fact, you'd probably be doing better if you were at Underdog Fantasy. Because if that one home league a year that you're 0-5 in every year isn't enough for you, then Underdog Fantasy is for you. It's all the fun of drafting your own players, but without the waivers and lineup decisions. Best ball drafts allow you to have all the fun of drafting your team, all the chances to win big with none of the week-to-week hassle. If you use the promo code COVER1, that's the number 1, when signing up to make your first deposit, Underdog will match that deposit up to $100. That is a free $100 US in free play if you use promo code COVER1. You get to do pick-em contests even. If you predict up to 5 different over-unders correctly, you can win 20 times your original money. Use promo code COVER1 when signing up. Must be 18 years or older to do so. Sign up today and start winning today. Thank you all from Underdog Fantasy, our wonderful sponsors there. And we also would like to thank our other sponsors, which is most of you, the lovely viewers. And for more of that, we will go to Greg and Aaron.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
Thank you, Greg and Aaron. Wonderful friends of the show, even though Aaron's never been on here. We are very grateful to all of our One Pass subscribers. It's really great. Sign up with that. It is not something you will ever regret. All the great content, all the great stuff there. We're going to now just sort of jump into it. We're going to address the first bit of news, and that is something that happened just a few hours ago, and that is that the Bills have now signed former All-Pro cornerback Josh Norman to the team. Yeah. This really doesn't move the needle for me. Like, okay, you have a body there now, but it is what it is. Like, I know I'm not moved one way or the other by Josh Norman being on this team.
I got a question for you.
Okay.
The Bills play the Giants on Sunday night.
Correct.
Say it's Dane Jackson, and then you get the pick. Josh Norman or Kyer Elam. Tell me who you're starting.
Oh, Elam. It's not even close.
Okay. Okay.
No. Listen. What? Listen.
To be fair, I agree with you.
Yeah, I understand that Kyer Elam had a rough game, but there's still something there with Kyer Elam. I'm not convinced that there's really anything there with Josh Norman, who has been a great player before, obviously. And in particular with this Sean McDermott defense in Carolina. But he's 35 years old, and most cornerbacks are not playing good football at 35 years old. That's not how it is. And also, like, the Giants, their receivers, or lack thereof, don't really present quite the same matchup problem that Calvin Ridley does to pretty much most NFL cornerbacks. Get into some of the comments here. Jordan Porter's driver. Giants is a get-right game. Let's see which of our backup defensive players are the next studs. It's a very, very positive outlook, Jordan Porter's driver. Yes. Steve Noble, hit the like, folks. Yes. Thank you, Steve. Hit that like. There are a number of you in here, and there should be exactly that many likes, like precisely, if not more. Some of you probably have multiple accounts. I'm kidding. Don't you don't need to do that. But thank you for hitting the like button. We appreciate it. RJ Melville, I think this Jags game is worse than 2021 because of the 23 injuries that occurred all in the first time. Okay, so logically, I agree with that. Yeah. From a pride standpoint, I will never get over losing to Urban Meyer in the NFL. That is a disgusting thing that should bear shame to this franchise forever and ever. I'll never get over that. I understand that's not a logical thing to say. I get that. I don't care. I hate Urban Meyer so much.
It was a bad game.
It was awful, terrible game to watch. It's gonna be rough. It's the injuries. I guess we'll move into the injury news. I believe earlier today was reported Matt Milano, fractured leg, no major ligament damage. I don't know if it was confirmed or not. I can't quite remember if there was. I think it was an MCL sprain, but not like a tear or anything. I can't quite remember.
I think it's just assumptions at this point that, like, it sounds like the ACL is intact, maybe a little bit of tweaking to the MCL, but none of that's been like publicly released.
Okay. So we'll keep that, but we know it's a fractured leg, and we know he's going to be out for an indefinite amount of time. McDermott mentioned earlier as he had his press conference that he's not ruled out for the season, which is some very optimistic thinking on the part of Sean McDermott. I don't know how true that actually is, but we'll see. On that same note, DaQuan Jones did in fact tear his pectoral and again is out for an indeterminate amount of time. Again, McDermott seemed to feel like he was not going to be shut down completely for the season. And it's going to be, I would like to see DaQuan Jones come back, obviously, because he was playing at such a high level.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not expecting or anticipating, nor do I want anybody to get their hopes up that either of these players will be coming back for the 2023 season or in the postseason. But it does sound like if one or the other does come back, it would probably be DaQuan Jones as opposed to Matt Milano. but we will see. In either case, losing both of these players in the same game is really tough. It's a tough pill to swallow for this team, and it's really, really hard for them to lose Trey White last week, come into this game, and then lose your starting one tech and your all-pro strong side linebacker. It's tough. I don't really get like how the Bills were able to construct this amazing defense on paper, and yet at no point during these last 2 years where they signed Von Miller and have all these other pieces that they've had, will they ever have all of them healthy at the same time.
Yeah, it's awful. And you kind of brought up the point, like you lose your all-pro linebacker, you lose a guy that's playing like an all-pro in DaQuan Jones a week after you lose Trey White for the year. Like you're talking about, I think I could make an argument that those 3 players are the 4 top, or amongst the 4 top players, along with Ed Oliver, on the Bills defense thus far this year. And now 3 of them likely done for the year. If I had to put a percentage on Matt Milano, I have no inside source, obviously. If I had to put a percentage that we won't see him this year, I'd say 99%. With DaQuan Jones, I'd probably say like 85%. These are just random numbers I'm coming up with. Like, I don't expect to see either of them. So now it turns into a situation where it's like, okay, who's going to play that other linebacker spot? Who's going to play the one tech? It's probably going to be Poona Ford, which is a great backup plan, but you don't replace DaQuan Jones. You sure as hell don't replace Matt Milano. And as we saw this week, you don't replace Trey White either. So it's just something that where Sean McDermott's going to really have to dig deep into his bag of tricks and figure out a way to make this defense way better than it is on paper now.
Yeah, and for a defense that's been playing at such a high level through the first month of the season, to lose so many players in back-to-back weeks, it's tough. And they came into this game kind of a little shorthanded anyway, obviously with Trey White, but then Greg Rousseau also was hurt. It's tough. And Christian Benford as well, also hurt. Like, it just became so difficult, which makes the overall performance of the offense all that more frustrating because the defense played well considering all these other issues that they had. And speaking of the offense, as Pops Mafia also talks about, tight ends are hurt too. Yeah. So Dalton Kincaid is in concussion protocol and Dawson Knox has a wrist injury. It's not fun. Not great for a team that runs as much 12 personnel as the Bills do. And there's been a lot made of Kincaid and his early start to the season, kind of not being the big play guy that some people were hoping he would be. It's a little overblown in my opinion, but in either way, you don't want one of your starting tight ends in concussion protocol, and you don't want the other one with a wrist injury. So,
yeah, the injury bug, like, it's wild. If you go back 3-4 years ago, the Bills were one of the healthiest teams consistently. Like, no one ever got hurt. They were constantly, every single starter played every single game. And then last year we just got walloped, like absolutely destroyed with injuries. And this year's somehow worse. Like, we're losing more players this year. It just feels to a point like this franchise is snake bitten, but it's just awful luck. And at this point, no one's going to feel bad for the Bills. Sean McDermott's well aware of that. The entire team around him is well aware of it. So now you have to have guys step up that are in these depth positions. And as far as like, I also want to kind of address this too. This Patrick Surtain stuff has to stop. Can we just there's no way in hell they're trading Patrick Surtain.
Let's have discourse. The Broncos roster is in shambles because they just gave up so many picks for Russell Wilson. They, trade away Bradley Chubb. They tried very hard to be all in for last season and for this season, and it is going about as well as you might imagine. And while they're a bad team that will probably start selling off players pretty quickly, one of those players is not going to be Pat Surtain because he's one of the best players. He's probably the best player on that roster right now. The best player. So why get rid of your best player who's on a rookie contract? Doesn't make any sense. Stop trying to make it make sense. It's not going to happen. Get that pipe dream out of your head. It's not even a dream. It's literally delusions. And unfortunately, The only Salulu is not the Lulu in this case. Like, let's not make this a thing. Let's not entertain this particular idea. If any of your friends and family are struggling to give up the Pat Surtain dream, just send them over my way. Send them over to the Cover One Roundup. We'll set them straight.
And Ben Albright just tweeted out, this was
Yes.
about like an hour ago, that Pat Surtain is untouchable. That's the report. He's untouchable, which I responded, retweeted and said, can we stop talking about this? Somebody responded to me and said, nobody's untouchable if the price is right. They're completely right. Here's the trade for Pat Surtain. Ready for it? Josh Allen straight up for Pat Surtain. You want to make that trade? We can get Pat Surtain on this team tomorrow. The Broncos will accept that trade. That's the only one they'll accept.
Which is also really funny because the Broncos passed on Josh Allen in the draft to get Bradley Chubb, who's now on the Dolphins and not really doing much of anything. Roy Collins writes, there's got to be a better option than Josh F. Norman. Yes. His name is Kyrie Elam and Christian Benford and Dane Jackson and probably Jamarcus Ingram at this point. Josh Norman is nothing more than just an extra body to have who is familiar with his defense. That's it. I wouldn't get too worked up about Josh Norman being signed. If truly worse comes to worse, and Josh Norman is playing in a football game for the Bills in the year of our Lord 2023, it's probably because he's also playing across from like Jamarcus Ingram, and the entire season is now just in the tubes, and we're all just praying and hoping that everyone stays on this team in 2024. Yeah, there's I wouldn't be too worried about that. Pops Mafia coach Josh Norman. Sure, why not? Let's say that's it. Mason Miller says, "I'm so sad, boys. That loss sucks. The injuries are the takeaway here. Why do they need to be season enders?" Yeah. DaQuan was him. I agree with all of that. It's it is one thing. This is truly the embodiment of personification, whatever you want to call it, probably both, of the phrase insult to injury. I mean, just losing this game the way they did and then adding literal injuries on top of that, very, very difficult. And we're going to jump into exactly what happened. What are your first thoughts for the offense? Let's start with the offense because I think we'll spend a lot more time on the offense than the defense in this.
They clearly were sluggish. Like I don't really think many people could debate that. Like they started out really bad. I think Sam Martin punted 6 times this game, maybe 7. I'm not exactly sure the number. It essentially is the equivalent of how many times he's punted all season leading up to this game. So I just look at this offense and think like, did the jet lag play a role? Did they come to this not ready, not pumped up? I don't know what it was, but it took them until late in the third quarter to really heat up. And the wild thing, and again, tweeted this out yesterday too, Josh Allen didn't play a great game. Like he was good, but good for him is not great. Great for him is not elite. He was below great. And I looked at him and I'm still like, he still had 370 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like he still put up the numbers, but it still left a lot to be desired. And there was so many plays this game where it's like, could we just have that one back and the Bills still win the game? There was a Gabe Davis drop. There was that 50-50 ball to Stephon Diggs, which 9 out of 10 times he catches that, the Bills win this game. So I look at the offense and I'm like, they didn't play up to their standards. They still played okay towards the end of the game. It just shows how quick they can go from being absolutely awful in the beginning of the game to just turning it on, on the flip of a button. They just didn't turn it on fast enough this game.
Yeah, it got away from them early. And I don't even want to say got away from them. It was only 11-0. It's not like that was an insurmountable deficit for them to overcome. And we've seen this team score many points. We just saw it last week with the Dolphins, right? Where they score 48 points. And there's no reason for them. I mean, obviously, I think the Jags were an underrated defense coming into the game. I think that they have some really good players like Andre Cisco, like even Foye Oluokun, Tyson Campbell, other than when he's trying to 2-hand punch Diggs on a red zone fade, which was an interesting choice for him. But I mean, overall, it's a fairly good defense and a fairly well coached one as well. And I think that the focus with the Jags coming into the season was so much about their offense and so much about Trevor Lawrence, who also played pretty well yesterday, but they also had their own missteps and miscues and kind of have for most of the season. I don't think I've seen a Jags team where it felt like they played a complete offensive game. They obviously have their really good moments, but it's been rough for them as well. So I was also kind of just thinking, like, what is this Jags defense going to do to keep them in this game? And they came to play. It seemed like they were ready to go and ready to attack, and the Bills weren't ready. They came off sluggish. They came off flat. They didn't seem like they were 100% ready for what the Jaguars were going to do. And that's pretty disappointing. And as RJ says here, and Roy Collins, can't believe how shitty our run game is. One thing I noticed was that the Jags knew exactly where every play was going, especially in the run game. I mean, again, that goes back to coaching, probably more for the Jaguars defense than anything else, just because, like, it's a lot to figure out. It's a lot of work to figure out where exactly you're going to go, right? Like, most teams are going to be able to figure out, like, hey, this is what this team does in this situation. This is what this team does in that situation, et cetera, et cetera. Figuring out the best way to stop that is a whole other story, right? And so making sure that your guys are staying disciplined, making sure they're staying in their gaps, all that sort of stuff, that all goes back to your own defensive coaching and that sort of thing. And the Jags did a great job of doing exactly what they needed to do and being physical at tackling as well. It was a really good performance by the Jags defense and a really, really bad performance by the Bills offense. It was just from top to bottom. And the final stats for the run game are about as bad as you can imagine. Harris goes 3 for 13. Murray is 2 for 6. And Cook is 5 for -4, which was probably the most disappointing part of that, given just how well that Cook has played to start the season. To then go with -4 yards is very, very difficult.
I mean, the good news is his worst game this year is better than Josh Jacobs' worst game this year. So at least we have that going for us, which is nice. But yeah, there was no run game. I think Josh Allen was the leading rusher with 14 yards. Like, that's how little of a run game there was. And that probably was the Bills' biggest issue, just because every time they ran the ball, they were getting stacked at the offensive line. And that's an issue with the offensive line. They weren't blocking. I forgot who said it. Somebody pointed out on Twitter, Osiris Torrens had his worst game as a pro. So you're just looking at issues up front in the trenches, and this is a Bills team that has dominated in the trenches for weeks. And the one thing that kind of concerned me was the Jaguars' defensive line is good. It's not a world beater defensive line. It's not better than the Washington Commanders. So then I look and I'm like, what the hell happened this week? Why suddenly did they kind of fall off a cliff? And there's a billion different excuses that Bills fans can make, and I've seen every single one of them, and they're driving me nuts. The Bills just didn't come to play. That's essentially it. And it was frustrating because at the end of the game, it just had to turn into the Josh Allen show, which we know he's capable of going and single-handedly winning a game. But like I said before, it was too little too late. Like, they're just waited too long to really turn on the gas and go for the W.
Yeah, it was very frustrating. It felt like every pass just sort of felt very short, felt very constricted. It felt like they were really trying to clamp down on those big plays, which is very typical of the NFL defenses nowadays, is playing those sort of too high shells and trying to limit big plays. But everything just felt so constricted. It felt a little too, and everyone that wants to with Cover One can go back and look to sort of form their own opinion, and we will have plenty of podcasts and videos and all that sort of stuff to break down exactly what happened. But to me, on that first watching it live, it felt like it was too vanilla on offense. It didn't feel like there was that same level of misdirection and creativity that you had seen the week before against the Dolphins. Everything just sort of seemed very like we were gonna do this, we're going to run in this personnel, we're going to do this, and we're gonna we're gonna try and beat them straight up, which I don't like. I don't appreciate that particular way of thinking when it comes to offense. When you look at like what this team has done, and especially last week against the Dolphins, they just went all sorts of things. They did all sorts of things, whether it was putting Diggs in the backfield, mushing him into the slot, having certain guys out wide, and that sort of stuff. That's the sort of creativity they were looking for. And it felt like that was really, really missing from this offense yesterday. It just sort of felt like they got so discombobulated early on and weren't really sure what to do until it was basically too late.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Actually, I hadn't thought about that either. But essentially, Josh was just in shotgun with James Cook to the right of him the entire game. Like, that was the formation they were in. And there just didn't seem to ever be anything where they were trying to confuse the Jaguars. It was essentially the Bills saying, our guy's going to beat your guy on this play. And that's just not how the NFL works. You need some sort of trickery because the athletes are so talented. And at the end of the day, Diggs consistently won. Gabe Davis won a few times, but other than that, I mean, you had Deontay Hardy on like a deep ball. It was a weird game. Like, there just wasn't any consistent flow, especially early on. It would be like, oh, here's a nice play. Here's a nice play. Stop. Oh, we got a punt. Like, that's not the Bills we're typically used to. We're typically used to a Bills team that literally just doesn't punt. Like, we could have left Sam Martin in the United States. That's at least what I thought we could have done. And instead, he puts in more work this week than Tyler Bass did, which was probably quite a betting line if you really want to bet that. So yeah, it was a frustrating offensive performance kind of all around. There was some good, but there frankly was more bad than good this game. And that's the first time I've been able to say that since week 1.
Yeah, it's really difficult to kind of take this, especially coming off the great high of beating Miami the week before, and in the way that they did it too, to then go to this where you look at this team and they're just so flat, they're so lethargic, everything just sort of seemed lost and confused most of the time more than anything else. And it wasn't a typical like, oh, what a bad Josh Allen game, right? Like, it wasn't like he was, trying to run around like a chicken with his head cut off and throwing bad throws or making bad interceptions or whatever. It was just like it just wasn't working. Like, it just for like 2.5 quarters, essentially, it just nothing worked for what they wanted to do on offense. And it was really difficult. And what you brought up Gabe Davis, and it's funny now. Seeing it happen live really irritated me when he dropped that pass, and all of Twitter was just like, oh, there's the Gabe Davis drop. There's that drop by Gabe Davis. Oh, this is why you can't do anything with Gabe Davis. And it's like, this is his first or second drop of the year.
I think it's his second.
His second. Okay. His second drop of the year. Chill out, right? Like, he had a very good game outside of that drop, and frankly, they still kept going on that drive in spite of that drop. And why are people waiting for Gabe Davis to screw up, right? Like, it says, are we so overinflated with our view of what a wide receiver 2 should be because Miami has Jalen Waddle? Right? Like, are we expecting every wide receiver 2 to be Jalen Waddle? If so, then I guess you would be disappointed with Gabe Davis. But Gabe Davis provides a lot of really great things as a wide receiver 2. I think he's a very capable wide receiver 2. And to see that yesterday when it happened was very frustrating. And the fact that he continued to play well after that wasn't surprising to me. But the other part that wasn't surprising was the fact that nobody really seemed to be all that interested in the fact that Gabe Davis played well. It was very, very interesting to see that all play out.
I think it's validation complex, right? Like, fans were so down on him after last year. And again, he was pretty good last year. He wasn't great, but he was good last year. But fans were so down on him. So now every time he makes a mistake, they're like, see, I was right. I told you he stinks. I told you. And the only thing that I look at when I see that and the hypocrisy around it is when Josh Allen was drafted, a lot of people said he was going to suck, and then kept doing that for years and years, and it drove us crazy. And now Josh Allen's great, and all those people had to eat crow. it's kind of the same thing with Gabe Davis. It's like you're doing what everyone else did to Josh Allen, but you're doing it to Gabe Davis now. Yeah, I mean, that drop sucks. I wish he didn't drop it. It would have been great if he didn't, but he still put up 100 yards yesterday. And he adds that he's a deep threat. He's a bona fide deep threat, like probably one of the better ones in the league. So he keeps those safeties deep. They keep their eyes on him. He has gravity. It's not just the plays he makes a catch. It's also the plays where he's out on the field and they have to pay attention to him. They have to focus on him. Otherwise, he's going to do damage.
Exactly. Roy Collins says, Gabe Davis may be in KC next year. Careful what you wish for. If Gabe Davis is on the Chiefs right now, he is easily their best wide receiver, and it's not even close. Not even close. I mean, come on. That's just crazy. Autumn writes, I don't think having a wide receiver 2 is as important as just utilizing all your guys. Too many people just want to spam feed wide receiver 1 and 2 button, but the benefit of having versatile pieces is a versatile offense. Excellent point. First of all, and I kind of mentioned this in the recap that I wrote yesterday, that it was great to see Diggs and Davis both go over 100 yards, but it felt like the other pieces of this offense are just, through the first 5 weeks now, it just sort of seems like they're like a sideshow, essentially, to the Diggs and Davis main part, and especially Diggs. And yeah, this is obviously not me trying to advocate for taking reps and targets away from Stephon Diggs. He is one of those top 5 wide receivers in the NFL, right? Like, you have him, you have Hill, you have Adams, you have Jefferson. Like, he is one of those guys. He's in that upper echelon. That being said, you have a lot of other guys that you can utilize. And we talked about, there's been discussions about Kincaid and his usage. You have Dawson Knox. And you know, with Knox, it's tricky because he presents a lot of great things as a blocker. Yeah. So it's hard to just sit there and say, well, he should be getting the ball more too, because he's great with the ball in his hands too. He is. He's also a really good blocker as a tight end. So you have to utilize him in that sense as well. I will say, I'm glad that Steve Noble brought this up. Nice to see Hardy go down the field as well. Deontay Hardy has been good when he's been targeted, which is actually been how he's been throughout his whole career, right? Like, he was not somebody with a huge target share in New Orleans, but when he got the ball, he made big plays and made plays when he needed to make them. And it's basically been the same in Buffalo as well. It's just that Dorsey, and the way Dorsey is using him is to try and set up other things as well, which is fine. That's what you should do. The problem is they didn't really do that yesterday. There was just this sort of lack of usage and creativity across the whole offense. It wasn't just like, oh, he just left Deontay Hardy to do nothing. It was just that, you know, it's really tricky to sit there and look at all these guys that they have and say, like, okay, but if you were just going to keep throwing the ball to Diggs and Davis the majority of the time, why invest in Deontay Hardy? Why get Dalton Kincaid in the first round? It just sort of seems like this. It's just a little bit odd for me. And maybe this is a bit of an overreaction to what we're seeing from yesterday, but it also feels like this is a trend from just the first month of the season on offense. What are your feelings, sir?
Well, I'm going to throw out a stat and then I'll go into that a little bit. So okay. I just looked this up because I was interested in it. Deontay Hardy's snap count by week. So I'm just going to read off his 5 snap counts by week, starting in week 1. 15, 15, 13, 15, 15. So he's a 15 snap count guy, which is 25% snap share about. I mean, I guess that's where he should be. I thought he'd be a little bit more than that with the money they're paying him.
The contract in particular is interesting because when that was initially announced, it felt like that was a lot of money for somebody who's going to be like wide receiver 3 or 4 on this offense. But then you see it's very incentive laden, which is fine. But it is interesting that like 15 snaps almost consistently. Very, very specific and very interesting. Yeah. And again, going back to this idea that like he is just a really productive receiver on a per snap basis. I mean, when he got signed, that was sort of the tagline that went with him from like PFF guys who loved that signing. They all basically said like Deontay Hardy on a per snap basis will get you exactly what you want. Like he will make plays on a per snap basis, which is fine. It's just that you sort of see what he can do, and you just sort of feel like, well, why not give him the ball a little bit more?
Yeah, I think I like the way that you described it. You said it's like they're all like a sideshow to the Davis and Diggs kind of show, and it's frustrating because you look at their stats. A lot of them, you look at Dawson Knox. I think he's under 100 yards on the year. Dalton Kincaid's not getting the target share that a lot of fans thought he would. Trent Sherfield's not really playing. Khalil Shakir's really not playing. Deontay Hardy plays in and out. James Cook's getting some looks. It seems like Josh is dropping back and he's saying, all right, I'm going to look at Diggs. If Diggs is open, he's getting the ball no matter what. And then I'm going to go to Davis. If Davis is open, he gets the ball. And then I'll go to my third read, which will be this whoever. And he's never getting to the third read because one of those two guys is open. It's a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because Josh is more efficient right now than he's been in his entire career.
Absolutely.
So to a point, it's like, well, why should he start throwing to Hardy? Like,
right. And this is part of it. It's just like it's a problem, but it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Like you have really good players that are getting the ball. You also have really good players that are not getting the ball. And we just sort of want to see other players get the ball, and maybe we're just a little bit frustrated. I really think some of this really just comes down to being frustrated at a loss. I really do.
That's what it is. I had a Bills fan today on Twitter say he wants Diggs to get more targets. And I was like, all right, well, Diggs has the fifth most targets in the NFL. So what do you want? And he essentially was like, I want 20 targets a game, which is an outlandish number. You have some people saying that, like, you want Diggs to get targeted more, which is crazy. And then you have other people saying, well, why isn't Dalton Kincaid getting enough targets? Well, if we give Diggs more targets, how the hell are we going to target Kincaid more? I don't really know how you make Bills fans happy because you know someone's going to lose. Like, if you're going to target Kincaid more, you're going to target Diggs less. Like, that's just how these things work. And again, it goes back to Josh is playing the best football of his career right now. I don't really care about any of this other stuff. But you're right. If the Bills had won yesterday, no one would be saying anything about this stuff. They'd just be like, oh, yeah, Davis had a great game. Diggs had a great But because we lost, there's a lot more critiques of these little, like, minutia things that the Bills will clean up, and they get to play the Giants this week. And if they don't win that game, the show's going to be
then it's going to be rough. Autumn says that man plays Madden on rookie mode. If you think 20 targets is good, not wrong. Charles, tough to get everyone touches when the offense constantly stalls out. This is actually a really great point because the Jags ran about almost 80 plays to the Bills. What was it, 40 or 45, I think? And it is really tough to get a whole bunch of touches to people when you just keep punting the ball. And when they had 2 straight 3-and-outs to start the game, which, like, is the first time that's happened in a while for this team. And it's hard to get a whole bunch of touches to guys when you just don't have the plays out there. Ralph Wilson Sr. from the grave, 20 targets. It's not outrageous to Diggs. He's not wrong. He's probably not wrong. It was just really, really frustrating game to watch for that. Last thing in regards to the offense, let's talk about the offensive line because that is, without a doubt, their roughest performance. Osiris Torrance really did not play well, like you said. I think Connor McGovern got called on a hold. We could talk about officiating and how annoying and overzealous and over-involved Sean Smith and his crew were. But, even regardless of that, like, penalties still happen, and it felt like some of those penalties were more than fair, if not, certainly not all of them, and that kind of goes both ways too, because I'm gonna pull up the game book from this, kind of look at exactly how many penalties there were for.
I think there was 19. I think 19.
So let's see. Oh my gosh, how do I find anything in this stupid thing?
Yeah, the penalties essentially made the game was unwatchable for a lot of reasons. The penalties were a big part of it, and you kind of talked about it earlier. The NFL Network had the worst coverage I've ever seen of it. It was borderline unwatchable. Like, when a penalty happens, show me a replay. Like, can I just see it? Just see if it happened. Eric put out a tweet today of a Dorian Williams penalty. He got
Yeah.
hit for illegal touching or something. There was no flag. There was no penalty. I have no idea how that flag got thrown, but I didn't even get to see it in the game.
No, yeah, of course not. So the Bills were penalized 11 times for 109 yards. The Jags were penalized 8 times for 56 yards. So a total of 19 penalties, in addition to all the different injury stoppages that had to happen for this. The game almost went into the 1 o'clock slate because of this. Like, it's a constant stopping at the clock. It was just so frustrating. And what's really interesting is, like, penalties have kind of been like a mild issue for Sean McDermott teams with the Bills until this year, right? Like those first couple of games, hardly anything for the Bills, which was a very impressive thing and a very encouraging thing. And suddenly you just get 11 penalties. And again, the Jags also getting 8 penalties kind of makes me feel like this isn't like a Bills thing that we need to be overly concerned about moving forward. Right, it just sort of seems like an officiating crew that's just being over involved and being overzealous for whatever reason. And I don't know what Sean Smith's deal is. I don't know if he's just like a very ticky tack sort of referee in that regard. RJ Melville, Sean Smith's new Land Clark. RJ is kind of is gonna become like my referee reference. If you want to do some deep dives into Sean Smith and his crew, feel free, RJ. I'm sure you'll have a great time with that. But yeah, it was really frustrating to just like it felt like I was waiting for a penalty after a certain point, right? It just sort of felt like, oh, a big play. Where's the flag? Is there a flag somewhere that we need to look? It was just very frustrating. But to go back to the original point, offensive line not good. What are your? I don't know if there was anything in particular you saw though.
No, I mean, yeah, it just simply wasn't good. The one weird thing, and I don't really have any data to back this up. I don't remember seeing anything. Like, did Spencer Brown play a bad game? It seemed like it was pretty cool. Like, was he good?
I was just thinking the same thing. Like, I felt like the offensive line struggled, but I never felt like it was Spencer Brown that was struggling. And again, we could go back. We'll watch through the game again, but it never. I feel like if Spencer Brown had been the issue or like one of the main issues, we would have heard about that. We would have seen that timeline being filled with a lot of angry Spencer Brown tweets.
It would have been Spencer Brown's going to get Josh killed. Then I didn't see that one. I wonder if I searched Spencer Brown's name from yesterday. I bet you there wasn't a tweet about him. No one didn't hear his name at all. So to me, that says he must have been fine yesterday. And it's wild to think, was Spencer Brown our best lineman yesterday?
Spencer Brown clearly just loves being in London. Right. That seems like a very Spencer Brown thing to really enjoy being in another country. It just sort of felt like the whole offensive line outside of Spencer Brown, again, very weird thing to say, was kind of disappointing. Torrance, who has been so good through the first 4 weeks, really struggled. Deion Dawkins had a couple, Deion Dawkins is generally a very good left tackle, and then he'll have a couple of games where he struggles. I think this was one of those games for him. It is what it is. Connor McGovern got called for a hold. It felt like Mitch Morse wasn't really having that typical sort of Mitch Morse game, but it was pretty tough all around. And you talk about we talked earlier about the run game struggling, and the offensive line absolutely did not help in that regard. The one play late, I forget exactly when it was, but they tried running it with James Cook, and he got hit like immediately because of a really bad block from the right side. Again, I want to say it was Torrance. Maybe that was a Spencer Brown play and we just didn't notice, but who's to say? It was a tough day for the offensive line and for them to have played as well as they have to start the season, and especially against good defensive lines like the Jets, like the Commanders. It just sort of felt like, really, this is the game where you're just gonna kind of do nothing. It was just very disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a yardage production day for the Bills. Like the stats outside the running stats aren't awful, but it just didn't seem in sync the entire game.
Yeah, 100%. Moving on to the defense. And let's start. Or do we want to start good or do we want to start bad?
I mean, let's just keep going on the trend of bad, and then we can finish with
Sure,
good.
that's fine. Let's make this a nice sandwich, right? Kyer Elam, you see why they wanted to start Christian Benford and Trey White to start the season, and why they didn't feel like they needed to activate Kyer Elam to start the whole season, because he really struggled. And in fairness to Kyer Elam, he had a very difficult task of trying to go against Calvin Ridley, who is a genuinely great receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But man, that was really tough to watch. If every third down, you knew that Lawrence was looking for Ridley, and as long as somebody was like, as long as Elam was sort of a yard off of him, you knew he was going to go to Ridley, because he knew Ridley was going to shake off him. He just knew that Ridley was going to find a way to get open against Kyer Elam, and it was very frustrating to watch that. It was very, very difficult. It was tough to watch.
It's notable that the Jaguars specifically schemed to get Ridley onto Kyer Elam and not onto Dane Jackson. They trusted Lawrence's ability to get Ridley the ball if Elam was covering him, not as much if it was Dane Jackson. And one of the things that really stood out to me is Jamarcus Ingram played. Like Sean McDermott put him in because he's like, we needed something different. Like, yeah. And he tried to kind of hide it in the way he said, it's like, we saw some schemes that we thought Ingram. It's like, no. Sean, we know what you're saying. Ingram was a better option to play at that point than Elam. And then the way that Sean McDermott even further talked about Elam after the game, where he's like, you got to be ready. If you're rusty after 4 weeks, like that's not an excuse. Like you got to be ready to go. And basically, clearly, Elam wasn't. It was a game which sucked because you look at a player that the Bills invested a first round pick in. I believe they traded up for him, and he does not look like it. Like after this game, I'm getting really close to dropping the B word on this guy. I'm not going to do it just yet, but it's upsetting. But at the same time, it just gives me more, levity and ability to say, like, it's Dane Jackson and Christian Benford's world moving forward. Like those two guys, I think give us the best chance to win on the outside. And I think both of them are significantly better than Elam at this point in time.
Yeah. Yeah. With Elam, and we talked about it last week where we discussed the idea of like them kind of going against the grain of what they normally take at particular positions. And in the case of Osiris Torrance, it has worked out for the most part. Obviously not this game notwithstanding, because he played pretty poorly in this game. But the first 4 games, he played very, very well. And that is somebody who doesn't fit that sort of Aaron Kromer archetype. And in the same sense, Kyer Elam is not somebody who fits their cornerback archetype. He's more of a man corner who likes to be physical, and it costs him and at times. And you see that. I mean, they see it at practice, right? And that's, I think, why they just sort of feel like this is not the guy that we want to play on this defense. And in the same draft, they felt like, all right, well, let's get some insurance. So let's get another guy in here like Christian Benford, who fits more of what they want to do. And it fits more of that mold and that archetype. And it's why he plays. And Kyer Elam didn't until yesterday. And it's really frustrating to see somebody that clearly is talented, right? Like Kyer Elam is a talented player. And it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if he leaves Buffalo and has success somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But for what the Bills want to do, it's really difficult to see him on the field consistently and be consistently out of position and not in a place where he's succeeding. It's just hard, and it's really difficult. And again, he had a very difficult task of going against Calvin Ridley in that game, who really showed off exactly why the Jags were willing to roll the dice on someone like him. But it was a very difficult matchup to watch. And at some point, you just sort of felt like, at what point do you just put Dane Jackson on him and just hope that he's a little bit better. Right. I don't necessarily know exactly why, or maybe there was something that the Jags were doing to try and isolate Ridley on Elam. I'm not sure. People who are much more knowledgeable about that sort of thing and strategies and tactics and stuff like that in the game of football, probably like Eric and Anthony, who are going to be on the film room this week. If you want to check that out during this week, just a little heads up. They will probably have a better answer to something like that. But it's really difficult. It's really difficult to watch that all happen. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, I would have, it'd be one thing if it was bad and he was getting torched, all game, but made like one good play. Right. He had one like coverage play where Lawrence looked his way and he kind of had Ridley, locked up, and then Lawrence just turned and threw it to somebody else for a completed pass. But that was the only play where anything stood out. When the ball was in the air, he was nowhere to be found. He was just constantly getting beat by Ridley. And the thing, like you said, he came out of college as a man corner. Like that's what he does. He excels when he plays man. There were points in this game where even if the Bills were in zone, he was pressed up on Ridley. You can essentially play man at that point, and I expect you to at least compete with the dude. And Ridley was just like, this guy's a joke. I can run past him all day long. And that's what he did. And it was third down after third down after third down after third down that Elam got beat. And that's probably the Bills' only weakness on defense. I mean, outside the running defense, which was a whole nother story.
Yeah, it was just tough. And part of the reason why the Bills were able to be so effective in the second half against the Dolphins last week was because the coverage and the pass rush worked together. Yeah. Right. And in this game, you didn't get that. The coverage wasn't helping the pass rush, and the pass rush wasn't really helping the coverage either. It felt like Lawrence was able to escape from some rushers at times. It felt like at other times they just weren't able to get any pressure on him. So it was a bit disjointed. And yet, in spite of that, they were still doing well in the red zone. And part of that is because of the efforts of one AJ Epinesa. How's that for a transition? AJ Epinesa had himself a game, folks. I mean, just I was astounded at how well he was playing throughout this whole game. That strip sack at the end of the first half got me fired up. I mean, it was a great play. He beat Cam Robinson immediately off the snap and just hit Lawrence, got the ball out, recovered it. Phenomenal play. Couple passes defense. Great game for AJ Epinesa.
I just thought this in my head, have not looked it up at all. In the Sean McDermott era, is this the most dominant game we've seen from a defensive end? Again, haven't looked it up, trying to think back. Did Jerry Hughes ever go off? Like,
I feel like last year's Chiefs game with Von Miller.
Yeah.
That to me was like that is why I always go back to as like that was the reason why they went to Von Miller, or why they got Von Miller. He had like 2 sacks in that game and a couple other like big plays.
Yeah.
That's what I always think of. But it really was a phenomenal game by AJ Epinesa. It truly spectacular. And this is really encouraging now that the Bills have faced so many injuries. I don't know, and I don't know exactly what the plan is to try and supplement some of those injuries or what it's going to be, but I do know that having yet another defensive end play at a high level is always a good thing. And especially for somebody like AJ Epinesa who struggled, and some of that has not been Epinesa's fault, right? Like he came in as a bigger edge rusher. They told him to lose weight and kind of change the way he played, which was like, okay, if you didn't like how he was built and how he won in college, then why did you draft him? Like it never really made a whole lot of sense. Then they changed it again, and it was a lot of back and forth with Epinesa and the Bills coaching staff. And last year he plays halfway decently, right? Like he gets 6.5 sacks pretty quietly, but it never felt like he was an impact player. In this game, he was probably the impact player for the Bills on defense. And that was a very encouraging sign. And I'm hoping that he carries that through and continues to play well. I think overall he's played pretty decent throughout this year. But this game was obviously his best.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just the sacks either. It was his
Right.
ability to affect the passing lanes. Like I, I think, I think he might have had 3 passes defended this game,
Yes.
or at least 2. He had 3. That's a ridiculous number for a defensive end. I don't think
Yes.
we're appreciating that, and
Well,
that is a
and two of
silly
them,
number.
two of them that I can remember were on quick passes that were to the outside of him, right? Where he saw what was happening in front of him. Again, I would have to look at this, but I'm pretty sure they were trying to cut him with a cut block, just to get him down, and he got away from that, recognizes what's going on, and just puts those long arms out, and then that's it. They can't get those easy yards from him. It was great. It was just a really great performance by AJ Epinesa. He looked like he was smart, like he was aware of what was going on, like he was in position and making plays. It's a really, really great performance from AJ Epinesa. And for somebody who has struggled in his first couple of years, to keep going and this is why you look at high character competitive guys, right? Who aren't just streaky guys who live off of being, high performance guys and high performance. It's like unique guys who can handle criticism, who can handle coaching, and can handle just not being the guy that they have been their whole lives as football players. Like they have to be able to take their lumps. And AJ Epinesa has taken like 3 years of lumps and is now starting to come into his own.
And it's a perfect, like, I can't think of the word right now, but like you draw the comparison between what we saw from Elam to what we're seeing from AJ Epinesa right now. Like we saw Elam sat on the bench for 4 weeks, come in and struggle mightily. We saw AJ Epinesa essentially sat on the bench for years and years. Last year he comes out 6.5 sacks. This year I think he's already at three sacks through 5 games. Like now he's cementing himself into this rotation with Leonard Floyd, with Von Miller, with Greg Rousseau, and suddenly now there was a point in time where the debate was should it be AJ Epinesa or Boogie Basham? Which one will we keep? Well, I'll tell you this much: Brandon Beane made the right choice, and now Epinesa is playing so well that the Bills probably got to move on from a Shaq Lawson or Kingsley Jonathan and make room on the roster for somebody, because there's no point in carrying 6 defensive ends when you have your 4 players that are your rotation, and AJ is a massive part of that rotation right now.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you're starting to, as Autumn writes here, team extend AJ. Who would have thought there would be that kind of sentiment from anyone coming into the season? And here we are now. It's been a really great development to see AJ Epinesa. Whether or not they're able to sign him to some sort of extension, who knows what kind of money he would even demand from the market. All it takes is one team, right, to just throw the bag at someone. But if the Bills are able to get a reasonable extension done, yeah, I'd love to see that at this point. I'm kind of all for it now. Moving on, Ed Oliver continues his amazing start to the season, and with the DaQuan Jones injury out there now, I'm glad that Ed Oliver is playing as well as he is, because it makes me feel a little more confident that with DaQuan Jones being out, that Ed Oliver could still play well and that he'll still be in a position to play well. And obviously Poona Ford also helps a little bit mitigate that loss just a little bit. And obviously, the gap between those two is significant. But also Poona Ford has been a legitimate NFL player for the last couple of years. So I think that with Ed Oliver playing the way that he has, it's really encouraging. And again, as a true Ed Oliver stan, as one of his bravest soldiers for the last couple years, I am fully vindicated in all of my defense of Ed Oliver, because he has just been phenomenal to start the season.
Yeah, in the past few years, we saw the flashes. Like you go to the Lions game last year, he dominated. And it was just string together some of those dominating performances. Like, let's get like 3 or 4 in a row. Well, this season, he's had 5 in a row. And he's absolutely dominating. Like, if the season ended today, I don't think it's wild to say Ed Oliver's an all-pro D tackle, maybe second team. I'd have to go through to really figure out if he has a shot at first team at this point. But it's funny that I got in a debate with a certain radio host in Buffalo on Twitter who told me that Ed Oliver is probably the 29th best defensive tackle in the NFL. No, Ed Oliver's been playing like a top 5 defensive tackle right now. He has 4 sacks on the season, 1 shy of his career high from his rookie year. He leads the league in tackles for a loss. He's almost like he's about to hit his typical like tackle total. He's at 24. He's usually about the mid 30s or low 40s. Like he's playing his best football, and to a point where he's literally dominating. Eric put out a clip today where he gets double teamed, almost triple teamed, and he just slips the tackles and brings down the running back. He's playing great pass rush, like great as a pass rusher. He's stopping the run. He's affecting everyone around him. He's making AJ Epinessa's life easier. He's making future Poona Ford's life easier. He's making Vaughn and Leonard. He's making everyone's life easier. He's dominating right now. Like that extension that the Bills gave him, which is significantly lower than a Quinnen Williams, than a Jeffrey Simmons. It's going to be lower than whatever Christian Wilkins gets wherever he goes. Like that contract now is a deal. Like the Bills got a great deal with that, Oliver. It's awesome. There's no reason to think he's going to slow down either. He's playing at a freakish level right now.
Yeah, it's been a phenomenal start for Ed Oliver. He has just dominated everyone that's been in front of him. Very, very encouraging. And especially because his extension was so controversial in the offseason. It really didn't feel all that controversial to me, just because I always liked Ed Oliver. And I felt like the money itself was really, like you said, this is not in the Jeffrey Simmons category. This is not in the Quinnen Williams category. This was a very fair deal for both sides. And the Bills right now are kind of reaping the benefits of that deal because he is playing at such a high level right now. We're going to move on to Terrell Bernard, who had 16 tackles, which, honestly, I probably couldn't have told you that during the game, but that's probably just because I was so annoyed and frustrated with everything else. But it was, another good game from Terrell Bernard. It seemed like it didn't feel like the Jags were really targeting anything over the middle, whether that was by design of trying to avoid Terrell Bernard, or maybe they were just knew they could take advantage of Kyer Elam versus Calvin Ridley. That's a whole other story. But it felt like Terrell Bernard is once again just sort of establishing himself as the Mike linebacker for this team. And now that Matt Milano is out, him being the main guy at linebacker is pretty significant. And it's good that there's a certain level of confidence that we all seem to have now with Terrell Bernard. But regardless, like that's not going to necessarily make up for what Matt Milano does for this defense. But it is still good that Terrell Bernard continues to play well in this defense.
Yeah, if you think about coming into the season, what we all felt about the middle linebacker position, where we thought that was going to be an issue, that was the weakest part of the team, and it clearly isn't at this point in time. If all of our thoughts and feelings heading into this season came true and that was an issue and Matt Milano went down, it would be full on panic mode right now because we would have nothing at the linebacker position. I believe in Terrell Bernard now. I think he's good. I think he's serviceable. If anything, there's an argument he might be better than Tremaine Edmonds. I won't go that far just yet, but he's kind of closing in on that
Not
ability.
that far off though.
Yeah, but I do have some concerns, and I don't even know if it's on the linebackers or what have you. The Jaguars saw something against the Bills, and they started doing it early, even when Matt Milano was healthy. Run outside, jet sweep, do things, get to the edge. They did it over and over again because they clearly saw some ability to get to the edge and pick up some yards, and it worked. I don't know if that's the defensive ends crashing too hard, if that's the linebackers not instinctually picking up that play, if the corners aren't coming up and making tackles or the safeties. I'd have to go back and look at it, but it'll be interesting to see when the Bills go up against a team like the Giants who like to do a similar thing with Wendell Robinson. If we're going to have that same conversation come next Monday, is why are these teams attacking the edge? What are they seeing that maybe we don't necessarily see just yet?
Yeah, it's a good point. And obviously the Bills also they drafted Dorian Williams. And there was a lot of discussion about like, is he a Mike? Is he a Will? And there were a lot of conflicting messages coming from Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott after the draft and even in training camp. And now you're going to have to see what Dorian Williams brings. And also, that's kind of also why they kept Tyrell Dotson as well, to be more of that linebacker depth, who I don't feel great about and never will, but
No.
it is what it is. Yeah, it's tough. And obviously it's tough moving forward without guys like DaQuan Jones and Matt Milano and Trey White. There's still plenty of good players on this team, obviously, and in particular on this defense, but it's not going to be the same level of dominance that we've seen in the first month of the season. And McDermott is a very good coach. He's a very good defensive coordinator. He's going to do what he can to put his guys in position to make plays, but it's not going to be the same defense that we all saw. And obviously Von Miller being back is also going to help with this. But again, it's just not going to be the same defense. And it's really disappointing, and it's really frustrating that this great defense that should all be playing together just pretty much never will. And it's disappointing, obviously, for the Bills, but even if you're just an outsider looking in on the game of football, it's pretty disappointing to just never be able to have Von Miller, Ed Oliver, DaQuan Jones, Greg Rousseau with Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano, Poyer and Hyde, and White and Benford all playing together at the same time. It's a very, very frustrating thing to not be able to have that all happen. We're going. That's pretty much all. That's pretty much all I got. Except for one final thing, and that is yet another round of true or rubbish.
True or rubbish. Let's go.
Okay, I don't know if I unlooped or looped it. Okay, it's on. Good. That's good. I did it right that time. All right, we're gonna do a couple of quick true or rubbish. If you are unfamiliar with this show, I will give Uber here a couple of statements, and he will have to tell me if it is true or rubbish. Feel free to play along if you like. We will feature your answers along with Uber. First statement: true or rubbish? The two outside corners for the Bills should be Christian Benford and Dane Jackson.
I mean, you know my answer. It's absolutely true.
All after all, can't believe it. It was true.
I wasn't 100% sure how much we would get into that discussion, so I kind of wrote it down earlier. And it's pretty obvious that these two need to be on the field.
They're the two best corners on the team right now that are healthy, and Dane Jackson gets a bad shake, but he's a legitimately decent NFL corner.
Pretty much everyone is saying true except for Spin 0481, who very vehemently says rubbish. Fight that fight, my good man. You do what you want. All right. Next statement. I'm gonna preface this by bringing up a conversation that you and I had on Twitter, which was that I felt like my hot take at the quarter pole of the season was that the Bills and the Ravens were going to face each other in the AFC Championship game. Both the Bills and the Ravens lose yesterday. So true or rubbish, the Ravens losing to the Steelers makes you feel better about the Bills losing to the Jags.
Yeah, because I got money on the Steelers winning that division. So yes, I do. Yes, it does make me feel better.
All after all, can't believe it. It was true.
Yeah, I have a decent amount of money on that. So yes, I need the Steelers to win that division. It makes me feel much better about that loss.
It is. It's amazing how that Pittsburgh team really is not good, and they're still 3-2. And I think are they tied for the division lead, or do they just outright have they lead the division? Just lead the division. The Browns have one of the best defenses in the NFL. Obviously, they didn't play yesterday because they were on their bye week. The Bengals were off to such a slow start, and now we'll see. But and the Ravens very easily could be 5-0. Yeah. But they just sort of like the Bills, they just sort of shoot themselves in the foot at the absolute worst times possible and lost the game in overtime to the Colts. And they lost the game yesterday to the Steelers after Lamar Jackson played a great game and was completely let down by his god-awful receivers yet again until the very end when Lamar Jackson made one bad throw on the interception in the end zone. And it's just of course, the one play, and yeah, slight exaggeration, but the one bad play that he makes is the one that really didn't matter in that moment. It's just like it was just very frustrating game to watch.
I mean,
yeah,
you wait until they win the division. I'm gonna come on the show with a crown on my head, just singing hallelujah. Like I've been on it so hard this offseason that they have to win the division. Otherwise, I have to go hide in like a dark hole with Aaron Rodgers somewhere.
Don't worry, Matt Canada won't be that far behind you. Last statement. Speaking of the AFC North, true or rubbish? Joe Burrow and the Bengals are back.
Oh, rubbish.
That is rubbish.
Ooh.
All after all. It was all rubbish.
They are not back. I don't believe in the Bengals at all. I think that Burrow might have a little something. Like, Burrow's still a really, really good quarterback. I just think that we kind of overhyped him a little. I don't think he's in that conversation with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. I think he's out on the outside looking into that.
I would agree with that. I would also say that through the first couple weeks, it was very, very clear that he was not even close to being 100%.
Yeah.
And the Bengals just like could not do anything on offense. They couldn't move the pocket around. They couldn't do anything. He wasn't mobile. He wasn't avoiding pressure or anything. Spin says rubbish. Phil's Our Electric says rubbish. Adam Cody says true. You see that hoodie Burrow was wearing. Spin also says this whole segment is rubbish. You're not wrong. But it seemed like yesterday against the Cardinals, and the Cardinals are the Cardinals, right?
They played the Cardinals.
They're not a great team, but they're actually probably more better offensively than they are defensively, just because they don't really have much talent on defense. But regardless, I felt like Burrow was at least moving around more and just looked a little more comfortable, and obviously, gave Jamar Chase a career day and a historic day for the Bengals. That's the most catches in a single game by a Bengals receiver ever, which is pretty significant. So my concerns for this Bengals team, let's assume Joe Burrow is now starting to feel better and his calf is starting to be a little bit more normalized, and that stays healthy throughout the season. This defense really isn't the same that it's been in the last couple of years. It seems like Dax Hill has been playing pretty good to replace Jesse Bates. It feels like Nick Scott has been kind of ho-hum whatever, which is about what he was with the Rams, right? Their corners are still kind of nothing, like whatever, and corners have never really seemed to be the focus of this defense all that much. Jermaine Pratt was this great playmaking linebacker, and they re-signed him to a pretty nice contract. But it seems like he's not making those plays right now. I don't know what all is happening with that defense, but it's not quite at that same level that they've been in the last couple of years. And I think that overall the Bengals are going to be kind of vulnerable. And again, even if the Bengals and if Burrow is healthy throughout the whole season, they're still going to struggle to be anything outside of Burrow, right? Like we've seen in those first couple of weeks, they don't have that changeup on their offense. They legitimately do not have the personnel. And earlier in the offseason, I had the pleasure of talking to Max Toscano, who's a big Bengals guy, a big LSU guy. And he's been adamant for a long time, for the last year, basically banging the drum as loud as anyone is willing to hear it, about the advent of 12 personnel in the NFL and how important it is to have 12 personnel in the NFL. If you're going to see all of these too high coverages, then you're going to need a changeup and you're going to have to be able to run the ball. The Bills clearly recognize that. That's why they got Kincaid and Knox and all that wonderful stuff. The Bengals just sort of said, we got T. Higgins, we got Jamar Chase, and we got Tyler Boyd, and we'll win that way. Okay, but if your quarterback can't play, and obviously you can't really anticipate your quarterback, destroying his calf in training camp and trying to play through that in the regular season, but you still need a changeup, and they don't have that changeup. And Joe Mixon is a good running back when he's able to get some space, but they just don't have the personnel to try and give him the ball consistently and be a good player in that right. And so this Bengals team is going to ride and die with Burrow. It just is. And if he's not healthy, they're not going to do much. And if he is healthy, then he will keep them in games and he will be able to, keep them in a position in a very tough division. But it's going to be tough for them.
Yeah, and it doesn't help them that they're already 0-2 in that division, so they have a big uphill climb to get out of that. I actually have a true or rubbish for you. You're gonna have to do that. You'll have to do the soundboard, so just prepare yourself to do the soundboard. True or rubbish? The Bills trade for a cornerback in season.
That is rubbish all after all. It was all rubbish.
Here's the thing. If they really wanted another cornerback on this team that they felt like was going to play, they wouldn't have signed Josh Norman.
Yeah, you're right.
Just like, I don't like. If they really wanted somebody who can play, they wouldn't have gotten Josh Norman. That's it. That's my thought on that. All right. Thank you all for joining us. We are very grateful for all of your support on your way out. We would love if you leave a like, if you share it with your friends, lovers, enemies, family, whoever. If you leave a comment, that would be great as well. Really appreciate it. You can find Cover One all throughout the week with great podcasts. You've got the Film Room on Wednesdays. You've got Disguised Coverage. You've got the Going Deep podcast on Tuesday nights. You've got the Air Raid Hour, which is going to start in about 45 minutes with Steve and Tilt there. You've got Buffalo Late Night with Thomas. His name is Thomas. I don't know why I keep thinking his name is Matt, and it really drives me crazy because there's literally nobody that I know that's named Matt. I don't know why I keep thinking this dude's name is Matt. I'm very sorry, Thomas. But Thomas does a great job on Thursday nights with the Buffalo Late Night. You've also got the Under Review podcast with Joe DeRosa on Saturday mornings. You've got What Happened This Week in College Football with Marlon Kerner. We've got all sorts of podcasts, all sorts of topics for you. We've got Chris Chu's doing a great job with the Cover One Fantasy. Every day he's putting out what feels like a billion videos, and they're all must-watches if you're going to be playing fantasy football this year. We got you covered. There's going to be written content from me, from you, from Ryan, from Greg Forrest. We got you covered all throughout the week. And frankly, if you want more, if you just love us so much and want more things to experience with the Cover One team, consider joining One Pass, as we talked about at the top of the show. $60 a year. We'll update that graphic. But for $60 a year, you get all sorts of extra analysis. You get Greg Thompson's breakdown of the salary cap, which helps unconfuse a lot of the weird, confusing parts of the salary cap. It's actually really, really great. You get scouting reports, analytics. You get access to the Cover One Slack channel with this great community of Bills fans. If you don't want to be on social media during the games, I don't blame you. Go into that Slack channel. You'll have a great time there as well. It's a really great, and it's a great way to support us directly. We really appreciate each and every one of our One Pass subscribers, and we appreciate all of you, our regular viewers of the show. Thank you very much for tuning in. Where can the people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can find me at UberHansen on Twitter. Wednesdays, I drop my rooting interest about, 8 a.m. in the morning. And Fridays, I drop my matchup preview, big, giant $2,500 word vomit with the game. So this week, hopefully, we get a better game against the Giants. I don't know if the Bills can cover a 15.5-point spread, but we'll see.
You all can find me at DFAUXY on Twitter or at DFoxy. Folks, thank you all for joining me. Let's have a better week next week. Thank you all. Bye-bye.